Okay, so on to the boring slides bit. So what I'm going to do now is just give you a sort of overview of the sort of things that make you want to actually use OpenSolaris. So how does OpenSolaris work? It's based around a Unix kernel and utilities, as opposed to the likes of Linux. If you take Linux, what Linux actually is the Linux kernel and the GNU utilities. Its more proper name is GNU/Linux. If you've ever seen Richard Stallman going on about that, you'll know what I'm talking about. Because OpenSolaris is based on a pure Unix, it's sort of kind of descended from System 5. It comes with the original Unix utilities, which are slightly different in some places from the GNU utilities. However, GNU utilities are also available in OpenSolaris, so if you want to use GCC to do your compiling, for example, it's there. So you gotta get the best of both worlds. As I've already mentioned, it's got a GNOME desktop, so it's just like using Ubuntu or Fedora or any of these kinds of things. It also supports Compiz, so if you want to do your fancy desktop effects and lovely windows and rotating desktop cubes and all that kind of stuff, it's supported out of the box, no problem. Package management, most Linux or Unix distros will come with a package manager, which allows you to easily install software. Ubuntu in particular has a fantastic system. It's based on the Debian system, synaptic apps, the various sort of interfaces to it. Where literally you just type a command and it goes and installs software for you. There's no messing around with downloading installers and clicking next until it finally gets it running on your system. Let's have some little music on. So that's in OpenSolaris. Basically, we've taken the ideas behind apt and Ubuntu and said, yeah, we're going to copy that unashamedly, basically because it's the best way of doing these things. So the OpenSolaris variant is called IPS, Image Packaging System, is it? I can't remember. And basically, it's exactly the same as using these kinds of tools on Debian or Ubuntu. So next thing we're going to do is we're going to run you through some killer features that OpenSolaris has. These are basically the reasons you would have for wanting to run OpenSolaris as opposed to any other kind of operating system. Before I do that, I'll just quickly run you through the different kind of distros that are available. Just like with the Linux world, when you put an open source kernel and operating system out there, people then look at that and go, oh cool, we're going to do something different with it because we want something else to happen. So based on what you're wanting to do, you might want to get a different kind of OpenSolaris. Now, the first one mentioned there, OpenSolaris 2008-11, that's the one that I'm demoing today, and that's the one that is on the CDs. It's basically, it's aimed at enthusiasts, so people who just are interested in this kind of thing, and developers, so people who want to try and get their programs working on OpenSolaris. It's currently on its second release. It's actually quite a new project. It's basically designed to sort of sync up with the way that Linux distros are distributed. So it's on a sort of rough 6-month cycle, and it's designed to be sort of quite close to the bleeding edge of OpenSolaris development, but at the same time it's not so bleeding edge that it's broken, which can be annoying. So that's the one that I would recommend you guys play around with. If you're interested in deploying Solaris in a more sort of really stable production environment, say you're working for a company or you've got your own business or whatever, what you can do is run the enterprise-oriented distribution, which is just Solaris 10. So that's what your big companies like BT or companies like this will be using. I'm never sure which companies I'm allowed to name when I'm talking about people who use OpenSolaris. There's all sorts of companies who use OpenSolaris, but quite a lot of them don't like to advertise that. I think they're scared of security risks or things like that. People know what operating system they use. I know that BT are quite happy telling folk about it. So Solaris 10 is very mature, it's very stable. It doesn't have all the sort of latest features that you'll find in the 2008-11 release, but the features it does have are rock solid. You're unlikely to have problems with it. So if you're setting up a web server or anything like that, Solaris 10 might be a good idea just because you know it's not going to break on you or have any kind of weird issues. Now, on the other end of the scale, you've got SXCE, which is also codenamed Nevada, which is Solaris Express Community Edition. Some really need to learn to come up with names that don't take half an hour to say. So that's a bleeding edge version that's basically as close to a nightly build as you're going to get in the public domain. And it's released every fortnight. It's got basically the absolute latest specs, but it's not guaranteed always to be absolutely working. You know, this is the development version of Solaris 11, essentially. So those are the sort of Sun distros. So all of these are produced by Sun, and I'll give you some links later on to where you can get hold of these. There are other distributions, just like in the Linux world. It's everybody's throwing their own alarm in. If you look on OpenSolaris.org, there's a whole bunch of them. Two of the most notable ones are Nexenta and Belinux. Nexenta is basically an Ubuntu OpenSolaris hybrid. So it takes the sort of Ubuntu shell with APT and all the rest of it, and it's taking that and using it with an OpenSolaris kernel as opposed to a Linux kernel. So that means you get all the power of the OpenSolaris kernel without having to have the OpenSolaris distribution if you want to keep with your Ubuntu way of doing things. Belinux started out as an attempt to sort of replicate OpenSolaris with a full GNU-based shell, as opposed to the sort of hybrid System 5 or GNU shell that you've got in OpenSolaris. Because that's kind of being duplicated by what Nexenta are doing, they're now actually basically focusing on KDE. So if you want KDE, like is on the level 12 machines in the CIS department, you can use Belinux to get a hold of that. I have to admit, I've never tried either of these, so I don't know exactly how good they are, but they're out there if you're interested.